Not every abusive relationship begins with shouting, obvious control, or visible aggression. Many start silently, subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, everything feels like care, attention, and concern. The person wants to know where you are, who you talk to, what you think, what you feel. And that can look like love. But over time, something changes. You start choosing your words carefully, hiding your feelings, avoiding certain topics. Small decisions begin to create guilt. Your freedom slowly shrinks, not because someone openly forbids you, but because you learn that giving in is easier than dealing with discomfort, silence, or emotional coldness. When a relationship becomes an emotional prison, you are still physically free, but emotionally trapped. You start living according to the other person's mood. If they are fine, you can breathe. If they are not, you blame yourself. Your peace becomes dependent on someone who often doesn't realize the power they hold, or realizes it and uses it. An emotional prison has no visible bars. It is built with fear of loss, fear of disappointment, fear of being alone. You adapt, reshape yourself, make yourself smaller. What once felt natural becomes effort. Love turns into constant tension. And the most dangerous part is that, little by little, this starts to feel normal. You begin to believe that love means constant sacrifice. That relationships are supposed to hurt. You start doubting yourself, your feelings, and your perception of reality. This video series is not about blaming, but about awakening awareness. About recognizing when love stops being a safe place and becomes a space of emotional survival. Because relationships should not imprison, they should shelter. If something inside you resonates with these words, this content is for you. Subscribe to the Beyond Love channel and leave a comment sharing what stood out to you the most in this first part. Your voice may help someone else recognize their own reality. An emotional prison rarely reveals itself clearly. It doesn't appear through direct orders or explicit threats. Most of the time, it is built through subtle, almost invisible signs that slowly accumulate until you no longer recognize who you've become inside the relationship. One of the first signs is the gradual loss of your voice. You stop expressing opinions, desires, or discomfort because you know it might cause conflict, distance, or emotional punishment. Communication stops being a safe space and becomes a minefield. Saying how you feel feels too risky. Another sign is constant guilt. You start feeling responsible for the other person's emotions, as if it were your duty to keep them happy, calm, or satisfied. When something goes wrong, you automatically blame yourself, even when you did nothing wrong. Over time, you begin to believe that you are the problem. Anxiety becomes a daily presence. You analyze messages, tone of voice, silences. Any small change triggers fear. You live in a state of emotional alert, trying to predict reactions, avoid conflicts, and meet expectations before they are even spoken. It is exhausting. There is also emotional isolation. Even while being in a relationship, you feel alone. You feel like you can't fully open up or be your true self. Friends, family, and personal interests slowly fade into the background because the relationship consumes almost all your emotional energy. And perhaps the cruelest sign is when you start justifying all of this. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that all relationships are like this, that no one is perfect. You normalize suffering to avoid facing the pain of admitting that you are emotionally trapped. Recognizing these signs is not weakness. It is awareness. Because no one enters an emotional prison all at once. The doors close slowly, while you are still trying to keep love alive. One of the reasons emotional imprisonment is so hard to recognize is because control rarely looks like control. It often comes disguised as love, concern, and care. Phrases like, "I just want to protect you," "This is for your own good," or "No one loves you like I do," are repeated until you stop questioning them. At first, this behavior may seem like extra attention, affection, or even romance. The person wants to know everything about you, follows your steps, gives opinions about your choices. But over time, this interest stops being about connection and becomes surveillance. What you wear, who you see, what you post, what you think, everything starts being observed, evaluated, and often criticized. The problem is not caring. The problem is taking away the other person's right to choose. When control is disguised as love, you begin giving up your autonomy to keep the relationship stable. You learn that to avoid conflict, it's better to give in. That to be loved, you must adjust yourself. Emotional manipulation enters when control is accompanied by guilt and fear. If you question things, you are labeled ungrateful. If you set boundaries, you are seen as cold or distant. If you try to step back, you are reminded of everything the other person has done for you. Love becomes a bargaining tool. Over time, you internalize this logic. You start policing yourself. Before acting, you ask whether it will please or upset the other person. Control no longer needs to be imposed, you carry it out yourself. This is one of the most dangerous aspects of emotional imprisonment, when external surveillance turns into self-censorship. When the fear of losing the relationship becomes stronger than the desire to be yourself. Love, which should free you, begins to restrict you. Recognizing this disguise is an essential step toward reclaiming your identity. Because real love does not need control to exist. One of the most painful signs that a relationship has turned into an emotional prison is when you slowly start to disappear. Not suddenly, but gradually and almost imperceptibly. You are still there physically, but emotionally you no longer recognize yourself. The things that once defined your identity begin to fade away. Tastes, hobbies, dreams, and opinions are silenced. Not because someone directly asked you to change, but because you realize that being yourself creates conflict, distance, or rejection. So, to preserve the bond, you adapt. You begin shaping yourself to meet expectations. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You agree with what you don't believe. You swallow discomfort to keep the peace. Over time, the relationship stops being a place of exchange and becomes a space of emotional survival. This loss of identity often comes with inner confusion. You feel an emptiness that's hard to explain. You know something is wrong, but you can't name it. You look at yourself and feel like you're no longer the person you once were, but you also don't know who you've become. What's most cruel is that many times you believe this transformation is a sign of maturity or love. You think you are growing, when in reality you are erasing yourself. You confuse healthy adaptation with self-abandonment. As you disappear, your self-esteem weakens. You begin to feel insufficient, inadequate, small. You start seeking constant validation from the other person because you no longer trust your own worth. Your existence begins to depend on external approval. Healthy relationships strengthen identity. Emotional prisons slowly erode it. Love should not require you to lose yourself so the other can stay. Recognizing this disappearance takes courage. It is the first step toward remembering who you were before you had to shrink yourself to be accepted. Living in an emotional prison doesn't only affect the relationship. It deeply affects your mind, your body, and the way you see yourself in the world. Even without visible aggression, the internal wear is constant and silent. It's a type of exhaustion that doesn't go away with physical rest, because its source is emotional. Anxiety becomes a permanent state. You wake up already tense, anticipating problems that may never happen. Your mind never fully rests because it's always trying to avoid conflict, predict reactions, and keep everything under control. This constant state of alert slowly drains your life energy. Self-esteem also takes a serious hit. Over time, you start believing that you are not enough, that you always fall short, that you must try harder to deserve love. Love stops being something you receive and becomes something you chase endlessly. Many people develop physical symptoms without realizing the cause. Frequent headaches, muscle tension, digestive issues, insomnia. The body expresses what the mind is trying to endure in silence. Repressed emotions always find a way out. There is also a loss of emotional clarity. You begin doubting your own perceptions. You ask yourself if you're overreacting, if you're too sensitive, if the problem exists only in your mind. This internal confusion keeps the prison intact, because without self-trust, leaving becomes harder. Over time, life outside the relationship loses color. Things that once brought joy no longer make sense. You feel emotionally numb, as if living on autopilot. This isn't a lack of love. It's emotional exhaustion. No relationship should cost you your mental health. When love starts making you sick, it's a clear sign that something must be reconsidered. Even when the pain is clear, leaving an emotional prison can feel impossible. Not because you don't want freedom, but because the bond created in this type of relationship is deeply confusing. Love, fear, attachment, and insecurity blend together, making every decision emotionally heavy. One of the biggest obstacles is the fear of being alone. Many people stay trapped not because they are happy, but because they believe loneliness will be worse than the suffering they already know. Familiar pain feels safer than the unknown. The relationship becomes a painful comfort zone. There is also the hope of change. You hold on to the good versions of the other person, the affectionate moments, the promises. You believe that if you try harder, love better, or become more patient, everything will improve. This hope keeps the prison locked from the inside. Emotional dependency grows stronger when your self-esteem is already fragile. The less you believe in your own worth, the harder it becomes to imagine a life outside that bond. You begin to believe no one else will love you, understand you, or accept you. Guilt also plays a major role. You feel responsible for the other person's well-being, as if leaving were an act of selfishness or abandonment. Even while hurting, you worry more about their pain than your own. Another important factor is psychological exhaustion. After so long living under tension, your mind is too tired to plan an exit. Emotional fatigue paralyzes you. Starting over feels like it would require strength you believe you no longer have. Understanding why it's hard to leave does not mean justifying the suffering. It means developing compassion for yourself. You are not weak. You are attached to a bond that was built slowly, on deep emotional foundations. Emotional freedom begins when you realize that staying also has a cost, sometimes a very high one. In every emotional prison, there is a quiet moment of awakening. It doesn't happen dramatically or suddenly. It doesn't come with absolute certainty or immediate decisions. Most of the time, it begins with a persistent discomfort, a feeling that something isn't right, even when everything looks normal on the outside. You start realizing that the relationship demands more than it gives. That you constantly give, but rarely feel truly held or supported. Small situations begin to feel heavier, not because they got worse, but because you are too tired to keep ignoring them. This awakening is also marked by a subtle internal shift. You begin listening to yourself again. The voice that was once drowned out by fear, guilt, or hope slowly finds space. You realize your emotions are not exaggerated, and your pain is not imagined. Many people describe this moment as the breaking of an illusion. The idealized image of the relationship starts to crack. You begin seeing the bond as it truly is, not as you wish it were. This hurts because it involves grief. Grief for the relationship you dreamed of, the promises that were never fulfilled, the version of yourself that believed everything would eventually change. At the same time, something new emerges, clarity. You understand that love should not require silence, fear, or constant self-abandonment. You begin questioning patterns you once accepted automatically. You realize the problem isn't that you feel too much, it's that you're in a place that hurts you. This awakening doesn't mean you are ready to leave, but it does mean you can no longer pretend everything is fine. And that is powerful. Because all change begins when denial loses its strength. Awakening inside an emotional prison is the first act of freedom. Even if there is no exit yet, there is awareness. And awareness changes everything. After awakening, a delicate and quiet phase begins, inner reconstruction. Even if you are still in the relationship or considering leaving, something has already changed inside you. You can no longer ignore your emotions or pretend you are whole when you are not. Rebuilding yourself doesn't mean returning to who you were before. It means learning to recognize yourself again, now with greater awareness. For a long time, you lived by adapting, reshaping, and shrinking yourself. Now, the challenge is to relearn how to occupy emotional space without guilt. The first step in this reconstruction is validating what you feel. Stop asking if you are overreacting and start asking why it hurts so much. Your emotions don't need permission to exist. They are signals that something inside you needs care. Little by little, you begin setting small internal boundaries. You may not yet be able to express them clearly to the other person, but you start honoring them within yourself. You notice when something hurts, when a line is crossed, when you betray yourself to keep the peace. This process also involves reclaiming forgotten parts of yourself. Returning to interests, friendships, and personal thoughts. Not as an escape, but as a reconnection with who you are outside the relationship. This strengthens your identity and reduces emotional dependency. Reconstruction is unstable. Some days you feel strong and confident. Other days you feel confused, guilty, or afraid. That is normal. Emotional freedom is not a linear path. It is a process full of progress and setbacks. Most importantly, remember that you are not broken. You adapted to survive. Now, you are learning how to live differently. Rebuilding yourself is an act of quiet courage. When you begin to rebuild, the emotional prison starts losing its power. Because the real cell was always internal. And that is where freedom begins. At some point in the process of emotional freedom, a quiet inner decision emerges, choosing yourself. This choice doesn't happen impulsively or selfishly. It is born from exhaustion, clarity, and the need for emotional survival. Still, it is one of the hardest choices to sustain. Choosing yourself often comes with guilt. You question whether you are being unfair, if you could try a little longer, if you are giving up too soon. This guilt doesn't arise because you are doing something wrong, but because you spent a long time prioritizing others over yourself. You were taught, directly or indirectly, that loving means sacrificing, giving in, enduring. When you decide to stop abandoning yourself, it can feel wrong at first. Discomfort is part of the transition from prison to freedom. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving. It means understanding that love without respect, safety, and reciprocity is not healthy love. It means recognizing that your pain matters too, and that your boundaries are not negotiable. This moment requires inner firmness. You begin saying no where you once said yes automatically. You start honoring your feelings even when the other person doesn't understand them. You learn that you don't need to convince anyone of your pain for it to be valid. Often, choosing yourself triggers reactions in the other person. It may generate resistance, manipulation, or guilt-driven responses. This is not a sign that you are wrong, but that the dynamic is changing. Emotional prisons rarely dissolve without discomfort. Over time, you notice that guilt fades as peace grows. Silence stops being oppressive and starts becoming comforting. You reconnect with yourself. Choosing yourself is not the end of love. It is the end of self-abandonment. Reaching this point is already a sign of strength. Emotional freedom doesn't begin the moment you leave a relationship or change a dynamic. It begins when you understand that you can no longer abandon yourself to keep someone by your side. That understanding changes everything. Freeing yourself emotionally doesn't mean closing yourself off to love. It means learning to love differently. With more awareness, more presence, and most importantly, more self-respect. After living in an emotional prison, it's natural to fear repeating old patterns. That fear is not weakness. It is learning. Emotional freedom is built when you begin recognizing your limits clearly. When you learn to listen to discomfort before it becomes pain. When you understand that healthy love doesn't require constant vigilance, fear of speaking, or effort to deserve affection. You start realizing that real relationships don't make you doubt yourself. They don't keep you in a permanent state of anxiety. They don't make you feel small so the other can feel big. Healthy love expands, it doesn't shrink you. Another essential part of emotional freedom is emotional responsibility toward yourself. You begin asking, does this make me feel good? Does this respect who I am? Am I being honest with myself, or just trying to avoid loneliness? These questions become internal guides. Over time, you learn that being alone can be a space for healing, not abandonment. That your own presence can feel safe. That you don't need to fit into painful relationships to feel loved. The greatest transformation happens when you realize you no longer need to prove yourself. You are enough without reshaping, silencing, or shrinking yourself. Loving from this place stops being survival and becomes choice. If this series resonated with you, remember that emotional freedom is not a final destination, but a daily commitment to your truth. And every time you choose yourself, the prison moves further away.